What's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stuff.
Am I going to get sued?
You got legal on this?
Let's send you out on the right note. PFF sucks. Have a great day, everybody.
Wow.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube, and today talking NFC win totals. We did the AFC on Thursday. Sam, how you doing, man?
Not bad, Steve. Not bad. You know, the home office setup here. It's nice. It's, you know, the internet is a little bit questionable. And the allergies, they followed me to Connecticut. Can't avoid those. So other than that, not bad. You?
Doing great. I wish you had something positive to say about your little vacation to Connecticut, but that's par for the course here, Sam.
Saw some
All
wolves, if that helps. You know?
Oh, that's great.
Wolf sanctuary, like little cute things, you know?
That's exciting. I'm glad you did. All right, so we're going to get in team by team, going through the NFC using DraftKings win totals. But first, as a busy parent, you want to give your kids a head start in their financial future. But investing can often be both confusing and time-consuming. Well, Fabric by Gerber Life makes it easy for you to set up an investment account for your child that grows with them and helps prepare them for their financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a UGMA account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. UGMA stands for Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. So while your kids can't invest while they're minors, a UGMA account allows you to invest on their behalf and gives their investments more time to grow. So join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios managed by Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Monthly minimum contribution required. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, Sam, as I said, we went team by team through the AFC the other day. We're going to go alphabetical now through the NFC. So if I could find them, it starts with the Arizona Cardinals, and their over-under for this year, Sam, is 6.5. Your thoughts on the Cardinals, 6.5?
Yeah, I think I'm optimistic on the Cardinals. I think getting Kyler Murray back, getting Marvin Harrison Jr., like just, again, remember last show we spent the whole time, or at least I did, espousing my newfound belief that a high-end quarterback can get you 10 wins right there immediately before you do anything else. And then the rest of the talent around that guy sort of dictates how many more than 10 wins you're going to get. Okay, Kyler Murray might not be in the category of that truly elite, you know, guaranteed 10-win quarterback that we were talking about, the Josh Allens, the Patrick Mahomes of the world. But I think if you sort of take the totality of the combination now of Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in, I know he's just a rookie, but what we think is one of the most pro-ready, complete, and high-end NFL prospects to come along at wide receiver for a long time. The combination of those two, you know, with what was already there in terms of Trey McBride at tight end, Michael Wilson at wide receiver, the backfield that was already strong with James Conner that's been reinforced in the draft, and an offensive line that's sort of slowly ticking in the right direction. I feel like that combination is as good as having, you know, one elite quarterback regardless of what's around him. Long way short of saying I don't even care what the defense does. I think they're winning 10 games.
10 games? You're just jumping right into 10 games for the Cardinals.
Right in.
Wow. Well, I've got a few concerns here for the Cardinals. First off, the defense that you don't care about.
Don't care.
Secondly, believe it or not, second hardest schedule per PFF.com. Second most difficult schedule in the NFC. Now it's 10th in the NFL, again, showing maybe the strength of the AFC and the whole AFC North. Like they're all, like 3 out of 4 of those teams are in the top 10, and they're all going to face each other a lot. But the second hardest schedule for a team that was a last place team, you know, picking in the top 3, that's a little difficult. And then Kyler Murray, right? I mean, you mentioned, I agree. I like Kyler Murray a lot. we just haven't seen him play his best football in 2+ years. You know,
Right.
the best football of his career. It's like trending properly from 19 to 20 to 21, his first 3 years in the league. And then he tapered off a little bit, had the injury. Last year had the new system and only played a few games. So will Kyler Murray get back to where he was? So yeah, I'm intrigued by what they've done. I think they'll be fine offensively. Can't wait to see those playmakers that you mentioned, and Trey McBride, you know, taking another step forward, and Marvin Harrison. Excited about that. Michael Wilson, all that stuff is great. The defense worries me, and I think the NFC West is going to be really tough, right? Are the Arizona Cardinals not the worst team in the NFC West? I don't know if we're going to be able to say that as we go through this show. So
That's
I'm
the
gonna go
biggest
the other
concern.
way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the biggest concern, I think, is the division. Like, I think that offense is actually going to be pretty good. I think the defense will be better than the talent maybe suggests it should be. They were like, the whole team was pretty feisty last year, despite really not much going for them at all. Even with Josh Dobbs at quarterback, they made it difficult for teams. But yeah, you look at that division and you're like, okay, the 49ers, we expect, we'll get there later, we expect them to be one of the best teams in the NFL. The Rams and the Seahawks are both like potential playoff teams. So just to do anything within the division for Arizona is tough because those teams around them are really good.
All right, you're taking the over. I'm taking the under here for the Arizona Cardinals. Let's go to the Atlanta Falcons. They're next up, and their over under, Sam, is 9.5. And if you remember, this is where in the AFC, teams like the Houston Texans, you know, some of these upstart, you know, maybe AFC championship type of teams were in that 9.5 range. The difference here with Atlanta, Kirk Cousins comes in, and again, per PFF.com, the easiest schedule in the entire NFL for the Atlanta Falcons. So we're looking at the easiest schedule, the upgrade of Cousins, all of the offseason drama of Michael Penix Jr. I think we're going to forget that pretty soon because Atlanta has a pretty formidable team and a relatively easy schedule for the season.
Yeah, it's one where, you know, to be fair, the Vegas is kind of acknowledging that, right? They won, 7 games last year. Kirk Cousins is there. Now the over-under is 9.5 for the season. So they have kind of looked at this and said, okay, we expect a significant bump for the Atlanta Falcons. Because remember, the sort of win totals, they're condensed. They don't spread all the way. You're not getting anybody with a projected win total of, 13.5 or whatever. The highest in the NFL is 11.5. So we're expecting Atlanta by these numbers to be a good team, which I think is right. I mean, this is they've sort of done other things on the roster, but this is a reasonably good roster that had Kirk Cousins added to it. So the question there is, what is Kirk Cousins going to be at 35 years old, coming off an Achilles injury? On the one hand, we love the skill position weapons that Atlanta has. You know, we think that the talent is there for Cousins to thrive in this environment and be a really high-end player. Also, the system is one that he's familiar with. Zach Robinson's version of this Rams offense, who, at one point, Kevin O'Connell, obviously the Minnesota Vikings head coach, was at the same place running effectively the same offense. So the transition should be fairly seamless schematically as well. It's literally just 35 years old who popped his Achilles last year. What does that do to a guy this season? But I do expect Atlanta to be good. And you're right, the schedule thing is huge. There's a bunch of different ways of looking at an NFL schedule, almost regardless of which way you look at. Atlanta has the easiest schedule in the NFL this year. So that's huge. Kirk Cousins wanders onto a team with great skill position players, with a system that he's familiar with, and what is sort of universally determined as being the easiest schedule in football to work with. It should work. I mean, again, Kirk Cousins is not in that category of genuinely elite quarterback, 10 automatic wins, but all those things together has me leaning 10 wins and over for this.
Yeah, it'll be a consistent theme here with the NFC South that the schedule is going to be favorable for at least 3 out of the 4 teams, not Tampa Bay, who's got the first place schedule, but it is a factor, obviously. And yeah, Atlanta, not to always compare to last year, but I thought they were a very good team last year overall. The defense was very impressive. They were a few Desmond Ridder, red zone, boneheaded type of turnovers away from winning 9 or 10 games, from winning that division. So again, it's not always as simple as just plop Cousins into the situation and boom, you go from 7 to 10 wins. However, I do think Atlanta does have they do have that ability. And I am very excited about those skill position players. I'm really excited for Drake London. I think in that draft class a couple years ago, Drake London, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, like don't sleep on Drake London as maybe being, the top guy out of that group. I think Garrett Wilson gets a lot of training camp hype, but I think London, with how often they're going to throw this year versus last year, London has a chance to have a monster season for the Falcons. So I'm excited about what Atlanta could do. All that said, I'm taking the over on that 9.5, given all of those circumstances, and staying consistent with how we did the AFC show. I'm expecting health from the quarterback. We're assuming 32 starters remain healthy. That's right.
Everybody's staying healthy, even the guys that are old with busted Achilles.
Doesn't matter. They're all staying healthy. Where are you going with Atlanta officially?
Over.
All right, we're both going over here. All right, Carolina Panthers are up next. I believe this is probably the lowest total in the NFC, over under 5.5 here for the Carolina Panthers. I think things are trending in the right direction. They actually have the 7th easiest schedule in the NFL, so they're actually not up there with Atlanta and in New Orleans, who's right behind Atlanta. But Carolina heading into this year 2 of Bryce Young, year 1 of Eric Eager for Carolina. Yeah. What do you see for them over under 5.5?
A big part of that easier schedule has got to be that they don't get to play the Carolina Panthers, right? Like that's the big difference between them and the Atlanta Falcons. Yeah. They don't play themselves.
I think that's how the math works out there, Sam. Yes, the Falcons and the Saints have the 2 easiest schedules, which include 2 games against these Panthers.
Yeah. I mean, look, Vegas is projecting a big jump, right? They won 2 games last year. They were terrible. So, yeah, look, it's a real... I got criticized a bit for saying that this is a make or break season for Bryce Young. I don't think it would be, normally, right, for a number 1 overall pick. You're going to get the grace of a few years. But last year was so bad. Like, if he doesn't show improvement this year, they're in a really tough spot because presumably they'll have the number 1 pick next time, right? As opposed to having traded it away to Chicago this time. At which point then you're presented with a real question, right? Like you're basically with the Justin Fields scenario again, except instead of Fields was the 11th pick, right? Instead of the 11th pick, you're debating whether you start over with the number 1 pick again, as opposed to number 11. But if he literally goes through 2 years without showing any kind of like optimism, and that was the thing, it's not necessarily that he was terrible last year, which he was, but it's that there was very little in the way of optimistic signs, right? There was almost nothing of, oh yeah, okay, it's there. It's, you got to look a bit and it's not there consistently and everything around him is terrible and dragging him down. There wasn't much. And, we've said this a lot. It's not like everybody who's had a rookie season like that goes on to be bad quarterbacks, right? Jared Goff had a terrible rookie season. Matthew Stafford had a terrible rookie season. Quarterbacks have turned it around. But most quarterbacks that start off with that kind of rookie season are bad NFL quarterbacks. So I think it's a huge season for Bryce Young, for Carolina as a whole. I think they've done a good job of trying to build around him and trying to make sure they don't repeat it. But you look at the team on paper and it still doesn't look great, particularly on defense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we'll talk a lot more about this as we get closer to the season. But Bryce Young, now I think the key here is Dave Canales coming in. Canales is fresh off of working with Geno Smith in Seattle, getting career years out of Geno, career year out of Baker Mayfield last year in Tampa Bay. And you mentioned Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff. Those are the 2 former first-round picks who did not look great as rookies and looked much better already by year 2. With Stafford, I think he got hurt in year 2, but by year 3, he was throwing for 5,000 yards. Goff, by year 2, looked good with Sean McVay, and by year 3 was in the Super Bowl. So I'm not saying Bryce Young's going to take that exact trajectory, but I do think it's possible. I do think he's more likely to get out of the funk rather than, hey, Zach Wilson just never really looked comfortable, never really figured it out. And I think Carolina has made those incremental additions to the team with the Deontay Johnson at receiver, with the crazy investment, big investment at guard. It's not crazy, just high investment at guard with Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. And again, assuming health with guys like J.C. Horn on the defensive side of the ball, Jadeveon Clowney coming in. Look, I think they'll be better across the board. So I'm going to go over for the Panthers here. I do think Bryce Young will look better in year 2. the one thing to remember, parallels to last year, Tampa Bay was like 2-7, 2-8 at one point, but there were positive signs with Canales, positive signs with Baker Mayfield. Then they went on a little bit of a run in the second half, end up winning the division. You might see something similar here, but I think there was always that, hey, something's different with Baker Mayfield this year. And if we see that early on, that'll be encouraging for Panthers fans. If it just feels and looks different for Bryce Young early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I do think Canales has the potential to be the single biggest offseason move that they've made. Like, they grabbed a head coach with a recent proven track record of taking quarterback and getting career years out of quarterbacks that weren't necessarily seen as guaranteed superstars, right? So theoretically, Bryce Young was supposed to be a future superstar, obviously the number 1 overall pick. So, I don't know if that kind of thing scales, and because, Bryce Young's supposed to have that talent to be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, Baker Mayfield was a number 1 pick as well. So, but point being, you take a guy that's done that with quarterbacks that had settled into this world of, maybe they're not that great, and gotten really high end play out of them. What can he do for Bryce Young? Because I'm conscious of going over for a lot of these teams, I'm going to say under for the Carolina Panthers. And I've also got you a synonym. The way we decided cogent should be your synonym for solid. Right?
Yeah.
It's not crazy, but it's eyebrow raising, right?
Eyebrow raising. Yeah.
Big investments in guard.
Eyebrow raising.
It's not crazy, but it's enough to make you go.
Both eyebrows, not one like The Rock, but both eyebrows.
Right. I mean, one could work.
One could work. Oh, I can't do. Well, you can do The Rock. That's great. Can't do it. Don't think I have that type of eyebrow control over here.
Just, huge investment in Damian Lewis. Eyebrow raising.
Cut that one up for social. All right. I'll take the over. And unlike you, I am not self-aware enough to try to balance out the overs and unders. By the end, 75% of the league's going over this year. That's how we're doing it. All right, let's go. Chicago Bears are up next, Sam. The over-under for the Bears is 8.5.
Ooh.
8.5 for the Bears. And currently number 3 easiest schedule for the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams coming in. A lot of excitement here. What are you looking for with the Bears?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so excited to see what this offense is going to look like. Like, how quickly can Caleb Williams hit the ground running, and how good can it be? I'm sort of fascinated by him generally as a prospect. Obviously, we've talked to him to death, the number 1 overall pick, this sort of slam dunk, obvious answer at the top of this draft. But his sort of analysis, his profile was comped to Patrick Mahomes a lot. And it makes sense, and it's a sort of unreasonable, unfair expectation. But the reason I think it's most interesting is the biggest question for him, to me, is the same as it was for Mahomes, which is, all right, the special stuff is amazing. That's great. Love it. It's fantastic. You've got that club in your bag. Golf reference for the U.S. Open yesterday. U.S. Open. But can you just play within the structure of the offense more? Right? We as a coaching staff are better than you're used to. The team around you is better than you're used to, let's say, because he had a pretty good coach in college. So we don't need you to do everything, right? We've got a pretty good structure going here. I just need you to play within it most of the time. And then when it goes to hell, that's when you go and make something special happen. And that was the question for Mahomes. Like, Texas Tech was all Patrick Mahomes just ad-libbing and making special things happen and doing whatever he wanted. And it works in the Big 12 when nobody plays defense. But does it work in the NFL? Probably not, but he was able to adjust. So that's the question with Caleb Williams. Like, can you play within structure more? And actually, I think his in-structure stuff looked really good. He just didn't do it as much. So if they can get him doing that, I think the ceiling for him, even year 1, is ridiculously high, given the receiving talent around him, given, the situation there. And then I think the Bears could really cook if he can. And if it looks a bit like, last year's USC, where it's just him playing hero ball constantly, you sort of saw, in the Notre Dame game or a couple of other games, like, NFL defenses will punish that pretty regularly. So then you could get one of those, Peyton Manning's been talking for like the last 25 years, like imploring somebody to please break his rookie record of interceptions. I mean, if he plays like that, it could be in danger.
No, it is difficult to throw that many interceptions in today's NFL. It really is. It's just different, man. But look, I think all good points that we, like you said, we discussed around draft time quite a bit. The playing within structure becomes easier when you have receivers to throw to, guys that are going to get open within structure. And that trio of DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and then, number 9 overall pick, Rome Odunze, to go with Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett. It is such a good group. DeAndre Swift catching the ball out of the backfield. So he's got the pieces. And I think that's where the optimism in Chicago is twofold. It's, hey, Caleb Williams is in the building. We have a quarterback to build around here. But also the supporting cast is far better than what they had with Justin Fields, far better than we've seen in Chicago probably since 2018. Now, you and I are both on the same page. I do think defensively, remember, they won 7 games last year, and a big part of that was the defense just playing better down the stretch. Personnel-wise, it doesn't look like a strong defense. So can they play, better? The sum of their parts better than the individual players. Yeah, they bring in Montez Sweat middle of the year last year, and TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds were solid linebacker picks, and Jalen Johnson had a career year. But can they put it all together? And they're young too. You've got guys like Tyreek Stevenson and Terrell Smith at corner that are heading into year 2. Jaquan Brisker heading into year 3. A veteran like Kevin Byard. I'm just naming a lot of players here. But nothing screams top 10 defense, but I also don't think they're, teasing having a bottom, 5 defense or anything like that either. So I think that's going to be a big question here for the Bears.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's more like, can they even just sustain what they were doing last year? Like, was that real, or was that a weird run where the results were better than the individual performances of the players within that defense? Because one would say, okay, this is a defense that will match the offense, and the Bears might be really good. The other would say, the defense might regress hard, and then you're sort of relying on the offense picking up that slack and being really good on the other side. So yeah, the defense will be almost as interesting to watch as the offensive side.
All right, 8.5, man. Over or under here for the Bears?
I'm gonna go over, I think.
Yeah, I hate this because I want to go over, because the schedule being the 3rd easiest, which is surprising to me in the NFC North, because we're going to sit here and talk up the NFC North as the best or second best division in football, right? So my instincts want to say under. Yeah, let me just go under, because I got to go under for somebody. I do have to be conscious of it at some point. 8 and 9. Oh, Bears fans are going to be so mad at me. They drafted Caleb Williams and they go from 7 to 8 wins.
And they almost get worse. At least they're winning more games than last year.
But Super Bowl, they're going to go NFC Championship in 2025. How about that?
Okay.
To balance things out.
The clip will have been cut before that. Nobody listened to that part.
Oh, absolutely. Dallas Cowboys. Over-under's 10.5 here for the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean,
disgusting.
Big question for Dallas, right? All in. The all-in season from Jerry Jones. 3 straight years of 12 wins. So obviously Vegas is predicting less than that. But as we said, they're predicting less than that for everybody. But their big kind of, the whole talking point in the offseason has been, are they even obviously better than they were this time a year ago? Which is concerning in a number of ways. Number one, it looks like the talent level is just lower across the board, in large part because they replace sort of established good veterans with young players, right? Who might be good, but might not be. To their credit, Dallas has been arguably the best drafting team in the NFL in recent years, right? So if any team was going to back themselves to identify rookies to come in and replace veterans and do it seamlessly, it would be Dallas. But, large swathes of data would say that's just a risky thing to be doing. Number two, the other area of concern with that, are they better than they were a year ago? Almost all of their top end players last season had career years, right? Dak Prescott, career year, arguably the MVP of the league in terms of just pure performance. CeeDee Lamb, career year. Micah Parsons, defensive player of the year type of season. All of their superstar players had career seasons and were amongst the best in the league and the best we've ever seen them. This was remember a few years ago where that was the case with Green Bay as well? Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, all of their 5 best players had career years. If one or two of those guys does not repeat that again, they're immediately worse than they were last season. That's kind of where Dallas is. all of their best players had career years. So just to stay where they were, they need to repeat that going into the next season. And the talent around them looks like it might be worse than it was a season ago. So I'm not saying Dallas is going to be bad or anything. I think they'll still be a good team, but I do feel like they've taken a step backwards by not taking a step forwards.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the last couple off seasons here, heading into the 2022 season, it felt like Dallas had taken a step back. Remember, they had traded Amari Cooper and never really. I mean, they got worse at receiver. CeeDee Lamb was great, but CeeDee Lamb plus Amari Cooper was better, and they had a couple holes on that team in 2023 heading into last season. They didn't make those mistakes. Now, it all ended up as a wash, right? We're talking about a couple moves at a couple starting positions where at the end of the day, whether it was 2022, 2023, they were a 12-win team who couldn't do it in the playoffs. And they actually won a playoff game in 22 and didn't in 23. So it feels more like, yeah, a step back was taken. The other question, the same thing I raised for the Dolphins the other day. Well, Dallas is that team that can beat up on bad teams, and that plays well in this discussion here. In over under regular season wins, I'm going to take the over because I do think Dallas. I mean, the question for the Cowboys is how do you get to an NFC championship and eventually a Super Bowl? It's not how do you win 11 or 12 games, right? They have established that that's what they are. And that's what's going to be real interesting as Mike McCarthy heads into the last year of his contract. If this is an 11-6, 12-5 type of team again, and then they have another playoff failure, is that just, hey, we got to go in a different direction? We just haven't figured it out in the playoffs. So I think regular season wise, they'll be fine. Take the over on the 10.5, even though it's a huge number relative to other teams in the NFC.
Yeah.
But, the bigger questions in Dallas is, have they done enough in what seemingly looks like they're worse at receiver, worse at running back? They do get Trayvon Diggs back at corner to go with Deron Bland. As you mentioned, probably the best drafting team since about 2016 or 17. They've brought in more talent and high-end talent than any other team in the league. And, it's them and the Chiefs pretty much. So they deserve credit for that. But is that enough to get, past the Niners and past the Eagles and these other teams that are, comparable from a roster standpoint?
And I would normally, I would be concerned by the loss of somebody like Dan Quinn as one of their coordinators, but they replaced him with Mike Zimmer, which I think is a really good move. Zimmer's defense sort of waned towards the end of his time in Minnesota, but some numbers there suggested he still had teeth. His third down numbers were always ridiculous. Like when he was actually dialing something up, Mike Zimmer was still cooking. It's just that overall, maybe the message was kind of getting lost or had grown tired, jaded, the players there. So I think Mike Zimmer's first year in Dallas, I don't think we'll see a drop off from the defense either. But I still think I'm going to lean under simply because I just feel like they've stagnated.
All right, next up's the Detroit Lions, and they have the same number, over under 10.5 for the Lions. Just like the Cowboys, they had 12 wins. Remember, the Lions and Cowboys tied overall in record, but the Cowboys had the 2 seed, Lions had the 3 seed, perhaps because of Penei Sewell's touchdown being negated on that Saturday night game with the Dan Skipper not checking in properly, according to the officials. But a 12-win team of the Lions, over under 10.5 going into this year.
That's right. Detroit cheated out of a win on national television. We all saw it.
So they're a 13-win team, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, so they're a good contrasting team for Dallas, not just because of last season, but actually because, both these teams were in a really good spot in terms of last year, what they did, what they're sort of carrying over into this season. But one of those teams seems to have probably taken a step backwards. The other one has taken a step forwards, right? Like their off seasons, I don't think could be much more different than they have been. Like Dallas has just tried to replace what they lost with young players, whereas Detroit has gone out there and identified actual significant upgrades at a couple of spots and gone and prioritized them and brought those guys in. So bringing in a guy like DJ Reader has the potential to be genuinely transformative on that defensive line. And they've done similar things in terms of we're going to need Terry and Arnold to come in and be good right away, right? But number one, they did it in a slightly different way. Like they targeted a potential blue chip player and traded up to get him rather than kind of let's just play the lower end of the first round and play the odds. But they've also added some of those veterans, like trading for a guy like Carlton Davis. So generally, I just think that the Lions have had a much more impactful offseason than Dallas and propelled themselves forwards.
Yeah, so I agree with all that. I mean, I think the other part too is keeping the coaching staff together in Detroit. You know, as they've gotten better.
And Johnson.
Yeah, I mean Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, they've kept everybody intact, and that is not always possible for a team like that. I mentioned all throughout last year. I think the Lions are the best team that has just incrementally got better and better and better every year, building from the bottom up and not necessarily be taking this massive leap forward because of the quarterback. Yes, the Niners have done that maybe in the Kyle Shanahan era, John Lynch era since 2018. The Lions feel like one of the cleanest versions of that. So yeah, I love all the moves the Lions are making. The question now is, in last year's division, on paper, the Lions were 12-5, while the Packers were 9-8, and then the Vikings and the Bears each had 7 wins. But I think if you have a full year of what looks like a star in Jordan Love, not half of a year of that makes it way more competitive. You have Caleb Williams coming in for the Bears, and then we'll see what happens with JJ McCarthy and the Vikings, but man, the rest of that roster also looks much improved. And if they're all healthy, you know, they look like 7, 8, 9 win team as well. So the NFC North has a chance to be really, really good. The actual official schedule has the Lions right around the middle of the pack. It's the 19th hardest schedule, so it's on the easier side. But I do think that probably gets more difficult as we get into the season. I think we'll see that some of those NFC North teams are a little bit better. So all that said is I don't want to go against anything that the Lions have done. I want to say over. And again, if I'm too optimistic, we'll deal with that. So I'm going to say over for the Lions. But yeah, I can't wait to see this NFC North and how a lot of those matchups end up playing out this season.
Yeah, I'm also going to go over. I mean, I do think Detroit's going to end up being one of the best teams in the NFL, at which point they'll go over that win total.
All right, next up is the Packers, who I just mentioned. And I don't have their number. I got to scroll. It's not easily organized here. It's not alphabetical. I don't know what the system is. Where are you, Packers? Where are you?
9.5.
You found them?
I did. I found them.
9.5 for the Packers. So a game behind the Lions. I mean, I want to say over for them too. What are your thoughts on the Packers?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most interesting teams in the league because of this youth movement. They feel like they feel like the trap everybody falls into when they play Football Manager for any extended period of time, which is just having like an entire squad full of 21-year-olds and continually replacing anybody that reaches like the age of 26 with another exciting young wunderkid prospect, and never actually sort of creating the team that is old enough to be amazing, right? Like you're just constantly planning for the future. Except, so for the second year in a row, they're going to have the youngest roster in the NFL. But the difference is they looked like last season that they were prepared to win with that kind of roster. Like they went on this run late last season. Jordan Love looked fantastic. They went into the playoffs and, you know, could have potentially upset one of the best teams in the league, and except they didn't play at that level. Like whether it was the rain or whether it was simply a bad game, they didn't play at the level they'd been playing at for the sort of previous run, and ultimately fell short. But so they then come into this year again with the youngest roster in the league, having tinkered around with it a bit. But I think it presents this wide range of outcomes where if any significant number of that youth movement takes a significant step forward in development over the course of an off season, or just, you know, by getting a year older and a year more experience and blah, 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 they could be really, really good. Or because you're relying on so many young players, like there's just always the capacity for that to go south in a hurry. And suddenly they're just not anywhere near as good as they look like they were going to be at the second half of last season. So I feel like Green Bay is one of those teams that has a really broad range of outcomes. I know everyone's going to skew optimistically because of the young players. It's automatically what you do. Youth equals hope equals potential. But I do think there's a big negative potential as well that we're just sort of not really going to acknowledge.
You're way too realistic here, Sam. I'm buying into the youth movement. I buy it. I mean, the one thing I'll say is, to me, it depends on the second half of the year, Jordan Love, right? I mean, he's not the only quarterback to ever have a great second half in his youth where it's like, okay, that's what he is from now on.
Right.
I mean, last year at this time, we were saying the same thing about Trevor Lawrence. It was Trevor Lawrence's second year. And if you, depending on where you put the cutoff, it was like, oh, since week 8 or since week 9, Trevor Lawrence is QB2 in PFF grading. And Jordan Love is similar.
Had a year like that. Baker Mayfield had a year where similar. I forget where the cutoff was, but he was in the top 3 of quarterbacks in the NFL in terms of grade, in terms of a bunch of other stuff from a significant portion of the year. Like it was at least half the season. God damn it. I've stop, go back. If you just cut off Baker Mayfield for like half a year plus, was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and it didn't happen, didn't sustain.
Right. So again, Packers fans, just hear me out. I'm not trying to temper expectations for Jordan Love. I have great expectations for Jordan Love. The difference between the first half of the season, where the accuracy was a little scattershot, and we've heard the feedback. You know, the receivers were young and they weren't on the same page. It wasn't as bad. It wasn't great though. It wasn't great. The offense. Remember, I used the statement. It looked like the Packers were playing with different playbooks. Like the QB room and the wide receiver room had different playbooks. They were not on the same page. And then all of a sudden, week 8, 9, whatever that cutoff is, whatever you want to use, but it's specifically after Thanksgiving and beyond, Jordan Love had all sorts of Aaron Rodgers-esque type of throws. But for me, forget Rodgers and Favre and all those comps. The confidence that Love played with, the confidence to stand in there, to make plays, to trust his arm, and then put the ball into incredible spots for just his receivers to go up and get the ball, the big-time throws that Love had. I mean, it was awesome. And you pair that with the actual narrative that the Packers drafted him back in 2020, and they were supposed to systematically develop him. And so when a switch is flipped, it's like, oh, that's what we expected because he was a developmental prospect and he has developed. That's why the narrative is pretty clean on Love. But all that to be said, all I'm trying to say is we've seen 8-game stretches and 10-game stretches of really good play, and that's not necessarily the goal for a quarterback. Now you have to adjust to defenses adjusting to you. Now you have to remain consistent. And so those are my questions for Love. I saw plenty of special last year with Love. Very impressed. Unbelievable what he did down the stretch. Now let's see that consistency. And I think they have it in them. But now let's see some ebbs and flows, not just like, hey, we're hot right now and everything's going great. As you mentioned, it was not a good finish to the season. They had a chance to win that game against San Francisco on the road in the playoffs to get to the NFC Championship, and it wasn't good. So Love those receivers, a good enough offensive line, plus you've got the, defensive coordinator change on defense with Jeff Hafley coming in. I think there's a lot to be excited about. I'll take the over for the Packers. I just can't wait to see what happens with Love and his, 17-week consistency here in his second year as a starter.
Yeah, it just comes down to answering the question, was the second half of last season real for Jordan Love, or was it just one of those runs, which we know can happen? Like in football and the NFL analysis in particular, we are creatures that like to create patterns or like to see patterns, identify patterns, but they don't always exist. So, and when a bunch of things, like there's a lot of reasons that make sense for Jordan Love to have that kind of half of a season, right? We've got that sort of Aaron Rodgers development plan for him. So it would make sense, right? He's going to be a little bit struggle a little bit, be a little bit rusty, however you want to phrase it, for the first half, gelling with these young receivers. And then at some point it's going to come together, and now he's just amazing. And they've done it again. And Green Bay is, identified their quarterback ahead of time. They've developed him on the right pathway, and now they've got their next version of Aaron Rodgers. On the other hand, each of us have been watching the NFL for too long to just be unaware that that kind of thing has happened before. And whereas you thought there was a pattern there, it's disintegrated, right? And again, Baker Mayfield is just one example I can think of where that existed. We would have been saying similar things, right? Amazing rookie year, struggled with the Freddie Kitchens stuff, and okay, let's throw that out. Doesn't count. That's not the real Baker. And then we had this run from like whatever that cutoff point was, where he's a top 3 quarterback. Now Baker's arrived, and it just doesn't always work that way. So all the reasons are there to be optimistic for Green Bay. The youth movement, the second half of the season that Jordan Love did have, I think the defensive coordinator change is an upgrade as well. Like that thing should help. I'm with you. I'm going to lean over with them because I am buying into the optimism, but you have to be aware of the potential negative as well, because we've just seen that manifest too many times to just think it's all sunshine and roses. There's no downside here.
All right, let's go on to the Los Angeles Rams. This is a tough one here, Sam. Over-under is 8.5 for the Rams, coming off a 10-win season with a big part of their nucleus back intact. Some other nice additions. However, maybe the biggest part of their nucleus is Aaron Donald, besides Stafford. Aaron Donald retiring here. What are your thoughts on the Rams going over or under here, 8.5?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of interesting that, Stafford, Puka Nacua going into year 2, Cooper Kupp being theoretically healthy and sort of therefore
everyone's healthy.
Yeah, we'll get in the second half of that. So now you've got Stafford, Kupp, and Nacua all in the same offense firing at the same time, along with that backfield of Kyren Williams, the addition of Blake Corum, the Kyren Williams clone, if you listen to the Rams. There's a lot to like about that. That's a really good group. And they've sort of kept firing on the offensive line a bit to try and make sure that doesn't regress or doesn't become the problem that it looked like it could be last year. But the big sort of elephant in the room is they lose Aaron Donald to retirement in the offseason, who was the best player in the NFL over the last decade, right? Let's put it that way. That's obviously a huge loss. However, it's as you correctly identified, it's less of a needle mover than having Matthew Stafford healthy for the season, right? And particularly the combination of Stafford to Cooper Kupp to Puka Nacua, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if the sort of analysis is saying that Donald is going to be that big a loss, or if it's simply expecting more injuries, like Stafford's durability to become a thing late in his, or to stay a thing late in his career, to just he's reached that age where we don't buy into him as much, and all those kinds of, like, if we're expecting offensive regression in addition to losing Donald.
Remember, Stafford was so good last year. There was a point in the season last year I kept saying, I don't look at stats. I think Stafford's playing great. And then I looked at Stafford's stats and he had no touchdowns. And, he was one of the lowest passer ratings, lowest completion percentage over expected in the league. I'm like, no. First off, I don't love that as a stat. I thought Stafford played some of the best football of his career. And that Jordan Love discussion we're talking about, remember, my old Stafford narrative was 3 or 4 times a year he looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, top 3, but he never really put it together from a consistency standpoint. In 2021, like his two healthiest seasons with the Rams, 2021 and then last year, Sean McVay's gotten the most out of Matthew Stafford. Those are, 2 of his best seasons, probably his 2 best. From a consistency standpoint, he had his ups and downs even on the Super Bowl run. But last year, doing this with the young supporting cast, with a change of scheme, the way they started to run more downhill, rather than zone types of concepts. So from a trend standpoint, last year was supposed to be the rebuilding year for the Rams, the super youth movement, and they overachieved. So it feels dirty saying, oh, they'll regress here, that let's go under the 8.5. We have to go under for somebody. It feels dirty doing that, right? Because they're all going in the right direction. Donald's great, but that's not going to outdo everything else that they've done on this roster, which is the youth movement, the draft investment, last year getting a whole bunch of young players, the credit, and then the experience, and then Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua looking like stars at their respective positions, right? So there's so much to be optimistic about with the Rams. But I also think that it is a tough division. And here's the other number. They do have the hardest schedule. So I mentioned the Arizona having the second hardest. The hardest schedule in the NFC is the Rams, 6th hardest in the NFL per PFF.com.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Where do you want to go with the Rams? Because I want to say over, because I like to say over for everybody.
Yeah. Well, conscious of the fact that I can't be over for everybody, I basically, if I don't have a particularly strong feeling on a team, I'm going to lean under. So therefore, the Rams will win under.
That's fair.
Their total.
I love the Rams. They're definitely going to win 10 or 11 games again. But for the sake of balance, I'm going to throw some balance in there. I will take the under for this year. Oh man, I don't like this. You know what? I'm going over for them too. I'm not going to break. I'm not going to change now. I'm going over for them too.
Hope somebody does eventually add up your over under to find out what the percentage is that you went over.
I think I'm close to 70% over right now, which is possible.
It could still work out mathematically, maybe.
Might. I don't know. I don't know if all these win totals add up perfectly. Minnesota Vikings, I guess if they all go just over, maybe it still works. I don't know if DraftKings has added this whole thing up. Minnesota Vikings, over under 6.5 for the Vikings. I still think that there's some optimism for the Vikings. The big question is, though, to me, it's similar to the Broncos. You have the 5th or 6th quarterback that was drafted. For the Vikings, it was the 5th. For the Broncos, it was the 6th. It's J.J. McCarthy. We don't know. The biggest questions for J.J. McCarthy was, well, he never had to carry Michigan, right? He had, 25 draft picks surrounding him and a great scheme, and they ran the ball like crazy and played defense, and he was just a game manager who made some big plays when he needed to, but we don't know if he can carry this thing. And how does that work in Minnesota? Because if the question was, hey, JJ only had to throw the ball 25 times a game, well, Minnesota likes to throw the ball, and they should with Justin Jefferson in year 2 of Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson coming back. They should. So can they actually maximize this very good situation for a rookie quarterback? Over under 6.5 here for the Vikings.
Yeah, like it's a combination of, what can they get out of the quarterback situation that they have? And by that, I mean, not just JJ McCarthy, but if Sam Darnold has to start for a while, what does that look like in Kevin O'Connell's offense? The sort of optimism season has been like, Sam Darnold's capable of a good little run of games, and Kevin O'Connell's offense is amazing. Like, Darnold's going to look great for a month and a half until JJ McCarthy takes over the starting job.
3 weeks.
Yeah, right. I mean, maybe Kirk Cousins was actually really good, and the drop off from Kirk Cousins to Sam Darnold would be huge. And it might actually, you might get a renewed sense of appreciation for what Kirk Cousins was doing after 2 months of seeing the combination of Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy within this offense. So I think not when the last season, 2022, if you watch that quarterback documentary, the Netflix thing, I think you sort of came away with a much greater appreciation for not just how good Kirk Cousins was, but how tough he was, the hits he was taking, the beating he was getting back there to make that offense as good as it was. I think it was similar last season until he got hurt, obviously, with the Achilles. I think there's the potential for this team to, this might be a growing pains type of year where we sort of appreciate how good Cousins was playing. He's not there anymore. Darnold isn't capable of playing at that level, and McCarthy might take a while to sort of slot into that and be able to shoulder that kind of burden. So I could, every year there's some teams in the NFL with the high expectations, June expectation season that just don't do it. It wouldn't shock me if Minnesota was. I think they have the ingredients for that to happen.
Yeah, that's the tricky part for Minnesota, because we're always going to start with the quarterback. And if you were just ranking the quarterback situation for Minnesota, where do they rank in the league? Sam Darnold could be the starter, as you mentioned, and JJ McCarthy, the 5th quarterback off the board here in the draft. Do they have some hope? Do they have some potential? Sure, absolutely. But for this season, it's tough to rank them as above a bottom 6 or 7 quarterback situation, right? Just based off what we know. Now, JJ McCarthy could go out there and tear it up and win the job and could be great. Or Sam Darnold, as you mentioned, has had 3 to 5 week stretches of his career where he's looked good, but never anything beyond that. So I'm certainly not going to bank on all of a sudden this year's going to change it. So that's the tough part, because everything else, O-line looks solid, receivers look excellent, of course, with Jefferson leading the way, and the defense looks much improved from a talent standpoint. And Brian Flores did a great job, running the defense last year with less talent. So you'd say, hey, they're improved there. They've got guys that can actually rush the passer, so they could send 4 once in a while instead of just 3 or 6. So a lot of things to be positive about in Minnesota. Over under wise, though, 6.5, it's kind of low. It is on the low end of what DraftKings is expected. I will say, PFF.com, we have a projection for, projected win total. This is one of the biggest discrepancies. A lot of times, for the Rams, for instance, PFF projects 8.5 wins, which is exactly their total. Good total. PFF projects 7.6 wins for the Vikings on a 6.5 win total. That's the data saying hammer the over on this one. That's one of the biggest discrepancies in favor of the team that we could see on the site. So I'll say over for the Vikings as well. Trust in the data.
Yeah. I mean, again, with my Rams ethos, if I don't have a strong feeling, I'm leaning under. I do think, look, the other three teams in this division could be really good. And so your sort of expectation is Minnesota being the fourth best team in the division, and fourth best teams in divisions can easily get 6 wins and less.
Oh, man. You're going under on this?
Yeah.
All right. New Orleans Saints over under is 7.5 for the Saints. This one feels low, but they only did win 9. They won 9 games last year. They tied for the top record with the Bucs. Bucs got the tiebreaker. But the Saints at 7.5, Derek Carr played better down the stretch. And I mentioned with the Falcons, the easiest schedule in the NFL. Well, the Saints have the second easiest schedule in the NFL. And as you astutely pointed out, it's probably because they play the Panthers twice. And most of the power rankings are going to have the Panthers as the worst or second worst team in the NFL. So where are you going here with the Saints?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I think there's a lot of things that would skew positive for them, right? The fact that their schedule is really easy. The fact that I do think Derek Carr is being underrated now because the start of the year and therefore the overall sort of production, the overall performance numbers are not encouraging. But I think the second half of the year was much better. And again, okay, if we made this argument with Jordan Love, we got to make it with Derek Carr as well. Was that real, or was that just a run of good play in the second half? If that was real and Derek Carr actually just took half the season to settle in and, find his groove there, and he can play at the second half of the season level all the way through this year, then I think that they're a much better team than that. The one big question mark I still have is the offensive line. I think we're still in this holding pattern where nobody knows if Ryan Ramczyk is going to be playing or not. I know they restructured his contract like a month ago or so, but there's still been basically no update, I don't think, from the coaching staff. Like, hey, is he going to be playing this year? Are we getting Ryan Ramczyk or no? If he's not there, I mean, I think that's a real problem. Like, the interior of that offensive line already isn't great on paper. The tackles would then be Trevor Penning, who's been so far a failed for a high-end or high draft pick of a tackle, and a rookie in Talise Fuanga. So that's a huge potential source of problems for this team that otherwise I think has the firepower in Derek Carr and that receiving core and the talent at playmaker to make real noise. It could all be undermined if the offensive line falls apart.
Yeah, this one, our descriptors of the Cowboys, where it's just the roster doesn't feel as strong as last year. I feel like that's been the trend here for the Saints. There was definitely a point last year where I thought all of their playmakers were excellent and they should have done more offensively. They were disappointing last year, Sam, because when we did the show last year, I guarantee we took the over because the Saints looked like the favorite to win the NFC South,
right?
The worst division in football, and similar to this year, they had one of the easiest schedules. They may have been the easiest on paper last year, and they never really took advantage of it. So they didn't take advantage of it last year. Now, new offensive system, and it's a Shanahan derivative, and those things tend to work out pretty well. I think that's in their favor. But I think, player for player, the Saints went from, they had this stretch where they were maybe the best drafting team in the NFL for a 3 to 5 year stretch, whatever it may have been, maybe more. I feel like that's dried up a little bit over these last couple of years. They're not getting the same type of production out of their draft picks, but still keeping that same strategy of not attacking the draft in volume. And I think all of that's adding up to just a lesser roster year over year in New Orleans, unless they get, massive improvements from, year 2 players, like a guy like Brian Bresee up front. Yeah. That's what they're banking on. And I just don't know if they have it. And it's another year where they did not add a ton in the draft from a volume standpoint, just guys that Fuanga and Kool-Aid McKinstry at corner. I like those players. I just don't know if they're doing enough to deal with all the roster churn because of the way they've been working the cap.
I mean, I think it shows you how fragile that good drafting thing is when you start. I think the real problem there is when you start believing that and therefore banking 100% on one high draft pick to do something, right? So you look at like how many of New Orleans' problems would be immediately erased if Trevor Penning was already a top tier left tackle, if Brian Brzee had looked like Jalen Carter, right out of the gate, or even Kobe Turner on the defensive side. I had another one as well that I forgot, or if Peyton Turner, had been a difference maker on the edge. Like even if just those three players, if they had all hit the ground running and been the correct answer, right, and been difference makers at those positions, you'd be looking at this roster and be like, Saints are great. They're in pole position, but because they put themselves in this position of, like huffing their own farts too much when it comes to draft talent identification. They're like, it's fine. We go get our left tackle. We go get our impact defensive tackle. We go get our new edge rusher, and we're great. Only none of those guys so far have been good. Now, they might turn it around, right? Brian Brzee in particular is extremely young young in the role. But it shows, I think, how dangerous that is as a plan to go, well, we've been one of the best drafting teams in the NFL. We need a left tackle. Go get our left tackle. He's the guy. And then if you go on a run of just like three of those guys don't plan out, it makes a material difference to the overall roster very quickly.
7.5 though. I mean, it's like a Derek Carr led team. It's not, I mean, there's still a lot of talent there for the Saints with the second easiest schedule. It's really tough to say under 7.5 here. Do you see the struggle here, Sam? Like I want to drop an under in there.
Yeah, but you can't find one.
Can't find an under. How am I going to find an under?
Can't find an under.
Where are you going?
I'm going to go over with the caveat that if Ryan Ramczyk ups and retires before the season, can I have a wit without Ryan Ramczyk?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
it's our show. You can do whatever you want.
With Ramczyk, I'm going over. Without him, I'm going under.
I'm just not excited about the Saints and their direction, but they probably go over 7.5 though. I'll just take the under. I'm doing a balancing act on this one. I'll take the under. New York Giants over under 6.5 here.
Oh.
See this. So this has been like my trend has been, well, the bad teams I'm just going under and the good teams I'm going over because I can't see the future here, Sam. I can't think beyond it. So I'm leaning that the Giants haven't done enough here.
Yeah, but the Giants are that classic example, though, where you look at last year's win total versus the over-under that Vegas sets. You're like, how could they possibly go under? I mean, they won 6 games last season with cutlets driving the wagon for periods of the season. Like, how could it possibly be any worse than that? Particularly when you then get to the upgrades that they've made, like drafting a guy like Malik Neighbors could be legitimately transformative for them.
Agree.
Finally give them the high end number 1 wide receiver that they haven't really had basically since OBJ, the last LSU superstar wide receiver that they drafted. So you look at that and you think, and again, if they've made significant changes, like if they've addressed their weaknesses in a real way, number 1 wide receiver, at least making an effort to creep back toward average on the offensive line with, signings like Illuminor and John Runyon at guard. Like you look at this group and you say, okay, those things are important, but also those are also addressing things that were really working at dragging down Daniel Jones, who, a year ago they thought was good enough to sign him to an ill-advised contract, right? And this isn't hindsight. It was ill-advised at the time. Like we were screaming, Daniel Jones should be given the franchise tag based off the season that he just had and the body of evidence that we previously have on Daniel Jones. This is screaming out for the franchise tag. This is why the franchise tag is there, is so you can hedge on a decision like this. Instead, they were like, no, he's worth it. We'll give him the contract. Well, that'll free up the franchise tag to go use elsewhere. So they thought based off 2022, he was good enough for that deal. And he had the kind of season that he had last season, in large part because the offensive line was garbage, because he had no wide receivers to throw to. And then he was like a force multiplier for negativity and made all those things look worse. But my point in all that is if you fix those things, I think you go a long way towards getting a vastly improved version of Daniel Jones. Whether or not that version is still good enough to be the answer long term, completely different question, right? But it's better. It's good enough to get you more than 6 wins.
Yeah, I get it. And look, I have concerns about the defensive side of the ball, though. I'm with you. Malik Neighbors could be an absolute game changer. Sounds like he is dominating already at minicamp. And
I've seen one-handed catches. What more do you need?
I mean, some of that buzz is legit and carries over, right? And if anybody's going to do that, it's the guy that goes 6th overall that some people said is better than Marvin Harrison Jr. I could buy into that. So my struggle is the defense, even with a new system. I just don't know if they have enough on the back end. And not a massive Brian Burns fan. I'm sure he'll be fine rushing the passer, but him and Kayvon Thibodeau, a lot of potential there. Love Dexter Lawrence. I just don't know if they have enough. I'm going to go under here for the Giants.
I'm going over. By the way, you, Mr. Optimism, Mr. Positivity, is somebody needs to create like a montage of you just ripping Brian Burns all offseason. What's your one hobby horse for negativity?
Listen, it's the offseason. Takes don't change.
Yeah.
I don't like Brian Burns for $28 million, and nothing's going to happen between now and September to change that.
I'm just
September,
saying,
maybe you can change it.
It's probably like a 2-minute video to be had of you just saying, I'm not a big Brian Burns fan.
We can make 5-minute videos of things you've repeated all offseason, so that's fine.
But
that's
people
what we
expect
do.
the negativity from me. It's just it shines as a lone beacon of your negativity.
Thank you. Philadelphia, we got 5 more teams here, Sam, in 20 minutes, so do the math. Philadelphia Eagles, over-under is 10.5 here for the Eagles.
Over.
Go.
Next.
Good job, Eagles.
Look, they were good last season and they completely collapsed. If they don't collapse again, they should still be one of the better teams in the NFC. And I think, look, I don't have a good explanation for the collapse other than to say when things start to unspool like that, it feels like a coaching responsibility to be able to drag it back together and stop the rut, right? And okay, ultimately the buck stops with Nick Sirianni, and that was why they were genuinely thinking about, do you fire the guy after a season like that? Ultimately, they decided, no, let's give him credit for the Super Bowl appearance, for the good overall performance, and let's assume he's the guy to piece it back together. But they then went, and the plan was, let's upgrade at both coordinator spots in a significant way. Because remember, like Matt Patricia was part of the solution last year, and that was a train wreck on defense. Now you bring in Vic Fangio, who's still the architect of one of the most important systems in schemes in today's NFL on the defensive side, and Kellen Moore, who, all right, is he amazing? Is he just good? He's better than what was there last year.
All right, next up is the San Francisco 49ers. 11.5 is their over-under. They're the only other team up that high, along with the Kansas City Chiefs. Over-under here for the Niners, Sam.
Yeah, highest mark in the NFL, justifiably, right? Like they look like one of the best teams in the NFL. Again, they kept all those insane skill position players in the building. They re-upped some of them. They're working on others. They even added to it with a first-round pick and Ricky Pearsall. I think they're still going to be dominant again. Like there's too much that's too good for this team not to be. It would take, I think, a spate of, they would have to get really injury unlucky, I think, this season to not be amongst the best teams in the NFL.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think now they only won 12 games last year. We're sitting here trying to say over under 11.5. It's the highest number, and along with the Chiefs. PFF projects them at 10.5. So right on it's a little bit lower because they're assuming, again, a lot of those projections are never going to project a team to win 13 or 14. Those are never going to happen. But on paper, everything's good offensively for the Niners. My question is the defense. Do they do enough on the defensive line to keep that depth together? If there was one team, because it's so high, it's not because I don't like the Niners. I might say under just because of variance. Just because of variance. I do like that division, but I love the Niners, and I think they have a great chance to get back to the Super Bowl again. I'm going to say under based off variance and because that 11.5 is so high.
And not just variance, but remember that there's multiple different ways of looking at the schedule, and we tend to only view it through the lens of how good is the opponent that you're facing. But there's also, like, the Niners get absolutely screwed in terms of rest days relative to their opponent, right? And that's big when you're talking about a a violent collision sport that has a defined number of days between the next time you have to get in the car crash again and do it all over, right? The Niners, I think, are the worst team in the NFL in terms of how much they're getting screwed by rest days. Warren Sharp had a big thread on this when the schedule came out. They're, for the second year in a row, I think, getting screwed the most of any team in the NFL in terms of those rest days relative to their opponents. They're also one of the top teams in the league. You should be right on this one, Steve, in terms of distance traveled, right? They travel an ungodly amount of distance, in part because they're a West Coast team, certainly some other teams.
Let that be a lesson not to build a team on the West Coast. So you don't have that.
Yeah.
You can't have it.
So,
be a Midwest team.
The strength of schedule in terms of who they're playing, might not be the hardest in the NFL, but they're getting screwed more than anybody else in terms of rest days, and they have to travel a ridiculous amount as well. So I still think they go over. I still think they win 12 or more games, but those are reasons they might not.
That's why I'm going under, but putting them in the Super Bowl again, right? Just a hedge, Niners fans. I'm saying under, from just a betting standpoint, but going to the Super Bowl, San Francisco 49ers. All right, Seattle Seahawks are up next. Over under 7.5 for Seattle. I mean, my instinct here is to go over for Seattle. They won 9 games last year. They've been very consistent with Geno Smith the last couple seasons and have a big chunk of that nucleus back again. Your thoughts? Yeah,
I was thinking when you said Seattle Seahawks, immediately my mind was like, well, they're a team I don't have a strong take on, therefore I'm going to go under. And then you said,
until you heard.
I can't go into that. They got to be more than that. But you've got the strong division that we talked about before. I guess maybe there's a Geno regression happening in there somewhere. But maybe the defense is better this year because they've brought in, Mike
McDonald.
There's too many Mac somethings now that are coaching NFL teams. It's confusing. They all blend into one, and I can't remember if I'm talking McDaniel, McDonald.
What was life like growing up in Ireland? If you're struggling with that,
yeah, it was rough. So Mike McDonald might bring in a better defensive system and a better defensive performance than they've had the last couple of years. Not because Pete Carroll's a bad coach, but just because, like the Mike Zimmer thing, right? The message may have gotten stale. So I can see the defense maybe picking up some of that slack. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to lean over. I think it's a harsh line.
Third most difficult schedule in the NFC. That's the thing potentially working against them. But yeah, I'm with you. Look, Geno Smith. We're very analytical here, Sam. We're always looking for regression candidates, and we all last year, even though I think you were impressed with what you saw from Geno Smith in his first year as a starter in 2022. We kept thinking, well, there were some high end games and some low end games, and how's that all going to shake out when it comes to the week by week in 2023? And when you take the totality of Geno Smith's season, it was pretty consistent overall. And when you look at the totality of 22 and 23, it was consistent for Geno Smith. And so I think that's what you're going to get. And he's got some dudes to throw to. I have questions about the interior of the offensive line. I think the defense, sometimes just changing the defense, to your point, moves it in the right direction. So I'm going over here for Seattle, over that 7.5. All right. Is that it?
Yeah.
Great job. 2 more teams. Tampa Bay Bucks are up next, and I don't have there it is. They're also, their over-under is 8.5 here for the Bucks, coming off a 9-8 season where they win the tiebreaker in the NFC South. Now, all the other NFC South teams have the on-paper really easy schedules, but Tampa Bay does not. Tampa has the 13th hardest schedule in the NFL, which is 4th hardest in the NFC, because they're playing that first place schedule. So what are your thoughts on Tampa Bay over under 8.5 here?
Yeah, remember last season, Tampa Bay won that division, but a big part of their surprise season was, number one, the Baker Mayfield performance, but number two, the other teams just weren't as good as they were supposed to be. The Saints were supposed to win that division basically by default, and they weren't as good. Atlanta had terrible quarterback situation, and Carolina was just outright bad. So I don't know that the Bucks were as good as they looked last season, and I could definitely see them regressing this year. So for that reason, I'm going to go under.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do that too. Under the 8.5. I think the nucleus is excellent. The consistency of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin with Baker Mayfield, I think that gets you to a certain point. I don't know. Every time I've bought into Baker, he's let me down. So let's go the other way and go the under here for Tampa Bay. And then team 32 out of 32 is the Washington Commanders. Their over-under is 6.5. Last season, of course, the Commanders had the number 2 overall pick with just 4 wins, but it's all new in Washington. New quarterback, new head coach. What are your thoughts on Washington's over-under at 6.5?
So much new that it's so hard to like put a pin on anything that they're going to be. Like turnover everywhere, new faces at every key position, basically on the franchise almost. It's so hard to get an idea of what that's going to be. Like, we talk about certain spots having value and continuity. Well, there's basically no continuity anywhere in this Washington team, including all of the most important positions and positions on and off the field for them. So I mean, obviously they're going to be a fascinating team to watch and see how that pans out, but it does make it very difficult to project what on earth you think they're going to be.
Yeah, I mean, not to oversimplify, but it all depends on what the quarterback does. I mean, like, I wonder how much they lean into. We talked a lot about the QBs who are special running the football, and Jaden Daniels has that ability. How much do they lean into that early on versus just saying, let's just work drop back passing game. Let's just get all those reps. Again, not that he can't do it, but every rookie needs those reps. Part of the reason why Jaden Daniels went number 2 is people love the way he sat in the pocket, went through reads, threw the ball accurately, threw the ball down the field. He does have Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson to throw the ball to. I think that's encouraging. I don't know if the offensive line is going to be where it needs to be to have early success for the Commanders. And again, defensive side of the ball, I've had questions about teams like the Cardinals and their defense. Are the Commanders any better defensively than some of these other teams that had a lot of talent turnover these last couple of years? So I think I'm going to lean under here for year 1. I'm going to go under for Washington. So basically, I'm still a hater for all the bad teams, the Commanders and the Giants, that they're just not gonna improve here. I'm sorry.
Let me throw a wrench into your plans, though. Washington travels the least distance of any team in football this year.
Give me the over. Flip it over. Just go a distance traveled. You're right. Commanders over. Officially over on. Yeah, I'm officially over on 70% of the teams.
I'm going to go over for Washington as well, but who the hell knows with Washington? Like, everything is new, so it could be anything.
Yeah, look, I know it's June 17th, and I enjoy a little vacation time, and we're going to have some time away in July, but this is getting me excited for the season, talking win totals, talking about all these teams, the storylines that we just can't wait to see how it all plays out. So I'm getting excited for the season here, Sam. A lot of fun talking team by team these last couple shows, NFC and AFC win totals. Be sure to check out the AFC if you have not already. And then you're going to be traveling back this week. We're going to be in office in the studio on Thursday. And I think we're going to be firing up some Madden, going back to our expansion teams. And so next couple shows are expansion team heavy and seeing who's better here.
And hopefully with working internet.
Hopefully with working internet. I got to go practice Madden. I'm going to go to the office and fire it up and run some plays.
And practice. We're both based off our expertise from like Madden 97.
This is real bad. It's real bad. I'm not a great gamer. I like Madden. I know Madden inside and out, but I just try to make it realistic. I don't try to beat the game. It's not good. So we'll be doing that this week. Anyway, we appreciate everybody for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your vacation, Sam, and we'll see everybody else on Thursday with more PFF NFL Podcast.